All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're breaking down a really huge strategic shift for NATO, and this is coming straight from one of its top generals. We're talking about a whole new era dawning, a new front line opening up in the Arctic, and a completely different kind of challenge for the entire alliance.
So, where do we start? Well, the general kicks things off with this real sense of urgency, and it's all about a new coalition, a new axis of adversaries that's forming against Western interests.
And this right here, this is the core of his warning. It's not just one country we're talking about anymore. It's a group, Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, and they are working together more and more. Their interests are starting to line up, and that alignment is pointed squarely at the West.
So you might be asking, what does this collaboration actually look like? Is it just talk? Not at all. The general lays out the specifics. China is bankrolling Putin's war machine. Iran is supplying them with crucial tech and weapons. There are even North Korean combat troops in Russia. And then there's this thing called the Dark Fleet. Basically a whole bunch of oil tankers that go off-grid, turning off their trackers to move oil secretly, getting around sanctions, and keeping the war funded. It is a very complicated web of support.
Now, what's really fascinating is that this competition isn't just happening in the usual hotspots. The general is pointing to a new front line that is heating up, and fast, the Arctic.
And here's the bottom line. A region that we used to think of as, this remote, frozen wasteland, it's now front and center, a key stage for geopolitical rivalry. This completely changes the map for how NATO has to think about defense.
So what's actually going on up there? Well, Russia is constantly testing some really advanced military gear in the Barents Sea. We're talking about new hypersonic missiles, the kind that are incredibly difficult to defend against. And on the other side, you've got China doing a lot of so-called research. But the general is super clear on this one. This isn't about studying, as he put it, the seals and the polar bears. The real objective here is to get a military edge, both on top of and underneath the sea. And this really gets to the why of it all. As the polar ice caps melt, brand new shipping routes are opening up, and there's access to all these untouched natural resources. So this massive environmental shift is directly cranking up the strategic importance of the entire region.
Okay, so with all of this happening, how is NATO actually responding? Well, they're adapting. And they're doing it by reinforcing their northern shield with some major changes to their command structure.
They've been pretty methodical about it. Think of it in a few key steps. First up, they created Baltic Sentry to guard all that critical underwater infrastructure. The cables and pipelines we all depend on. Next, they developed Eastern Sentry to make their air and missile defenses way more agile. And finally, and this is a big one, they've unified the entire Arctic Command under one roof, Joint Force Command Norfolk. This isn't just a scattered reaction, it's a unified, thought-out defense plan.
Now, in this whole new ballgame, the general points to one country in particular as a kind of blueprint for the future of the alliance, and that's its newest member, Sweden.
And here's where it gets really interesting. He highlighted this one phrase that just captures a whole philosophy, made with Sweden. And he made it a point to say how different that is from the old, more nationalistic idea of made in Sweden. So what does that actually mean, made with Sweden? Well, it's a whole new way of thinking. It's built on the idea of partnership, of co-producing and co-developing things together, across the Atlantic, instead of every country just trying to protect its own industry and go it alone. It's about building strength together.
And Sweden is already putting its money where its mouth is. They're acting as a framework nation for land forces in Finland, which basically means they're taking the lead on organizing the multinational troops there. They're also filling key staff jobs in major NATO commands. They continue to be a massive supporter of Ukraine, and their industrial base is built for this kind of collaboration. The general wasn't kidding when he called them a model ally.
All right, let's get to the real heart of the issue, the big takeaway from all of this. What is the single biggest challenge that NATO is facing right now? I think the answer is going to surprise you. With all these threats popping up and with countries finally spending more on defense, you'd think things are on the right track. But what's the real roadblock to having an effective deterrent today? And there it is. For the first time in, well, a very long time, it's not a lack of cash. The money is there. The problem is industrial capacity. It's the ability to actually build the tanks, the shells, the drones that all that money is supposed to buy. The signal has gone out to industry, but now they have to deliver.
And, the war in Ukraine has been a brutal but powerful lesson on this front. It turns out it's not just about cranking out more stuff. The most important capability now seems to be adaptability, having the ability to innovate at the speed of the battlefield itself, just like we've seen the Ukrainians do time and time again.
So where does that leave us? We've seen this new axis of adversaries working together. We've seen the Arctic turn into a critical front line, and we've seen that the biggest problem for NATO has flipped from funding to production. It all boils down to one final, really important question. The threats are evolving, the strategy is adapting, but as that hostile axis collaborates and the battlefield changes by the day, can the West's industries innovate fast enough to keep up? That, right there, is the challenge for NATO in this new era.